Salvage by user Rantarian. Chapter 4. Turning Point. The first chance that Karr had to see the human, he and Chir were returning from the surface of the Death World. She had been asleep at the time of the mission, and had awoken in horrible shock to Zrypov shaking her awake and telling her the bad news. That a human had been on the ship all along, and that Chir was being made to take him down to the surface of the planet. It had only been natural for the three slaves to have bonded in their shared captivity, and Karr was already thinking the worst of the human before the landing craft had even set down on the flight deck. She had ground her teeth together in agitation as the door opened, had hissed in relief as Chir was the first to disembark, and then inhaled so sharply she entered a coughing fit as the human emerged, covered in dried mud and blood. He had clearly made some attempt to clean himself up, as the mess had been washed from his face at least, but his clothing was effectively destroyed. "Chir!" she said, moving over to him quickly, giving the human a wide berth as she did so. "It is good to see you're all right. Zrypov told me you took the human down to the Death World. What happened?" Chir stared at her a moment with a blank, haunted expression. "We had barbecue." The human joined them at the mention of the word. His ears must have been incredibly sharp, and bared his teeth at her. "G'day!" Karr recoiled so abruptly that even Chir was prompted to follow suit, before looking at the confused expression on the human's face, his teeth still bared but somewhat more uncertainly, and sighing. "This is a human, Karr, and that is what they look like when they smile. It is supposedly a friendly gesture." "Most of the time, anyway," Adrian qualified. "Karr, is it? Reckon Trixie suits you better. What do you think, Chir?" "I think that it would be terrible to call anyone that," Chir replied directly, and Karr marveled that he could be so blunt with a creature that looked like it had just rolled around in a lake of blood. "Well, what do her friends call her then?" Adrian asked. "Karr," replied Karr. "Fuck them, then," Adrian replied cheerfully, although Karr couldn't understand why he felt himself entitled to suggest she copulate with anyone. "Excuse me?" she asked, offended at his forwardness. "It's a thing he says," Chir said wearily. "It doesn't actually mean what it means." "Exactly," Adrian agreed, and Karr felt even less informed than she had been a moment ago. "Tricks, then," Adrian continued, "is a compromise." That didn't seem like much of a compromise, but Chir seemed as defeated as he was deflated, and he didn't give any further protest to the sudden renaming of Karr. She couldn't help but feel a little bit betrayed. "Hey, Chir, where should I put the Askies?" Adrian asked as Chir started to walk towards the internal doors that led out to the flight deck. "Is there anything that I can use to move all of them at once?" Chir looked to Karr. Karr. Please get Adrian a hover platform to help him move all of the preservation containers. I am well past my sleep cycle." "Nah, yeah," Adrian said. "I was going to say, you look bushed. Gotta get some shut-eye while Trix helps me get everything sorted out." Chir paused, no doubt waiting for his translator to make a best effort. Karr's own translator was trying several possible translations, all relating to forests or shrubs, before giving up and heading to where they'd made their quarters. Adrian turned to her as Chir strode purposefully away, once again baring his teeth in what seemed so unlikely as to be a friendly gesture. "Well in," he said, so good-humored that Karr wondered if he was somehow unaware of what he was covered in. "Looks like I'm in your hands." Food supplies for the human have been secured and nobody ended up dying down there, with the exception of several of the local animals, Beckmer informed Triafa. "Normally I would like to know why it has stretched their skins out on frames in the far section of the flight deck, but I doubt I'd like the answer. He's already visited me in the medical bay and told me all about it," Triafa replied. As usual, Beckmer thought he was more informed than he actually was, and it secretly pleased Triafa to disabuse him of the notion. He intends to turn them into clothing. "Wearing the skins of other creatures?" Beckmer asked, genuine disgust in his voice. "It is exactly as savage as I had thought, Triafa. Did you ask it what was wrong with his polymeric clothing?" "I did, and it seems he prefers what he calls leather because it looks hardy and has unlikely thermal reductive properties," Triafa told him. The exact words had been tough and heaps cool, but Triafa saw no reason to make Beckmer fight his own way through the near unintelligible jargon. Relieving Beckmer of that responsibility was simply part of her job as far as she was concerned. Beckmer sighed. "I admit to have given up trying to figure out what the human means. It baffles me, but I am beginning to suspect that this is simply because I have credited it with more intelligence than it is actually due." "What of our food, then?" Triafa asked. "Aziz is overdue on his medical supply run, is he not?" "He is," Beckmer confirmed. He looked troubled and actually disturbed, not over the possibility that something had happened to Aziz. Neither of them cared one whit whether the Robalan was dead or alive. But the loss of any supplies and the micro-freighter would have far-reaching consequences for the salvage crew. Without that vessel, the only way to obtain more supplies would be to take the main ship. That would mean either leaving the Zadrsil unattended, or attended with a minimal crew and no power. The salvage ship was currently the Zadrsil's life support until its own power could be properly restored. And there was no telling when that may be. By how long now? Triafa pushed. She knew the answer, but she knew that Beckmer needed to play out the conversation if he was going to do what she wanted. Far too long, Beckmer replied. We need to act as though the micro-freighter and Aziz are lost. He may have defected. He is Robalan after all, or he may have met with some misfortune. Either way, we need to consider the worst-case scenario. That our location and the details of our work have been revealed to others, Triafa said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a guess. But she had left something unsaid. If it had been pirates that had caught Aziz, they'd be coming here to kill them all and claim the Zadrsil as a prize. If it had been the hunters, well, the prospects were similarly terminal, but with bonus torture and culinary elements. We can't yet move the Zadrsil, Beckmer told her, but I have Murga and Crick working on its reactor as we speak. Even a small amount of power would be enough to get us out of the system, or at least into a debris field that cannot easily be scanned. We can augment the FTL drive from our own ship if necessary. At least if we are boarded, we have a particularly psychotic human to resolve the issue, Triafa said, offering some comfort to Beckmer. Beckmer frowned in dismay. On that note, I have somewhat unfortunate news. It seems that the Directorate want us to send him, alive, to their studies division as soon as possible. The penalties for lack of compliance... He trailed off, but Triafa had some inkling of what would await a Kortai who defied direct orders from the Directorate. Not death, but isolation and irrelevance. If Beckmer ignored this order, he would discard any chance of future reward or acclaim. A win for Triafa, who would take over the leadership of the salvage team, but she wanted to take that from Beckmer fairly, not because some bureaucrats thought they knew better. Then we had better hope that the technicians get us a functional reactor.
What in the murk are you two making?
Zrypop demanded of Trikror and Adrian. He had gone in search of Trikror out of concern when he had not found her asleep in their quarters, and had found them working together in what appeared to be a machining workshop. "Hey there, Kermit," Adrian said, waving a gloved hand. He was wearing a poorly cut vest made of reptilian skin, the only garment he had actually managed to fashion from the disgusting materials. The rest had been wasted in failed attempts, and even this, abhorrent as it was completely rubbish from even the standpoint of simple workmanship.
Once again, Zrypop grated, that is not my name. Now answer my question.
Trikror looked up from her console, her face lit with something that Zrypop could only describe as fiendish delight.
We found a fabrication unit. Adrian had some ideas, and when I mentioned that I'd worked in developing weapons for the Dominion,
she shared a glance with Adrian.
Well, I'm helping him put some ideas into practice.
What kind of ideas?
Zrypop asked, now curious. He had been aware that Trikror was a weapons developer, but the idea of a Deathworlder coming up with weapons intrigued him. He was not unaware of the tactics being developed by a certain division in the Dominion-Kelzi conflict. Adrian produced a kinetic rifle, heavily modified and with a long cylinder connected to the kinetic aperture. A strange attachment was connected to the cylinder, with a mechanism presumably intended to be used to operate it. "This," he said, "is the prototype."
"It's like a coil gun," Trikror said excitedly. "Except not. We made the kinetic aperture smaller to concentrate the force, and that lets it fire a projectile. Using the force that would normally go into recoil, we've created an automated mechanism to load the next projectile into the chamber?"
Zrypop blinked. Most of that had gone right by him, which wasn't surprising since he was just an infantryman at heart. But it was clear that Trikror was looking to the human for advice and ideas. He wondered what the human was getting out of this partnership.
I don't see how it could be any more useful than the regular kinetic weapons,
he said dubiously.
Worse, if you think about it, since your ammunition is a lot more limited.
Nice to have an audience for the test run then, Adrian said. He put a hand on the mechanism and drew it back. Zrypop could see that it was intended to slide back and forth, and made an audible kerchank as something physical moved inside of it. And for some reason the sound made Zrypop's blood run even colder than it already did.
"We made a combat harness as well," Trikror said, pointing out a dummy wearing the armor. "That was also Adrian's idea."
Zrypop frowned, not liking what he was seeing here much. He took a step back as the human raised the weapon and looked down the long cylinder. After all, a prototype might explode, and went still as the trigger was pulled. A loud thunk terminated in a deafening crack as the projectile punched through the armor, passed through the dummy, and put major cracks in the rear plate. The The sound echoed down the abandoned hallways of the ancient ship, and with the exception of the human, they were stunned and silent. The human put down the weapon and went and investigated the armor with apparent disappointment. Would it be easier, he asked, turning back to Tricror, to give the gun more power or to make the rounds explode? Tricror absorbed this information for a moment, then willfully broke into the most predatory grin she could manage as an herbivore.
Why not both? You should be working on the reactor, Murga admonished her husband as she came upon him fiddling at the door. The door is not important. You heard what Beckmer said.
Crick clicked in irritation.
We don't know it isn't important, Murga. We don't know what is on the other side. What if it's the command room? What if there's a giant on button for everything?
What if hunters come and eat us because you were too busy trying to get into a janitorial cupboard?
Murga asked testily. She had put off her sleep cycle for some time to continue working on the reactor, and did not enjoy finding her husband shirking his duties to indulge himself in idle fancy.
I think I almost have it, though, Crick replied. I've got the right algorithm this time, I'm sure of it. These systems are extremely hardened, so it's unsurprising that we've had so much trouble.
How long will it take? Murga asked, irritated but resigned to the attempt being carried out.
Not long, Crick answered, but long enough to show my wife how much I adore her.
Murga snorted. Crick had always been laughably incapable at romance, but his inept attempts were persistent, and that made him charming. I'll be the judge of that. He was asking me about all sorts of things, Chur told Beckmer. The Kortai leader had taken a sudden and inordinate interest in what the human had been doing whilst not on duty, and what his conversations with the other slave soldiers had been. Mainly about how the ships worked. He wanted to know how they moved, where the rockets were, and how the flight deck maintained atmosphere when one side is exposed to space. What about weapons? Beckmer demanded. Did he take an interest in those? He said ours were as dangerous as a wet kiss, Chir replied with a frown. Although I'm not sure how dangerous he rates those. That would explain what he's been doing with the Ruaher female, Beckmer mused. We've detected power anomalies in a fabrication chamber, and it appears to have been used recently to fabricate new types of weaponry. Chir was surprised. Adrian hadn't told him anything about that, and nor had Tricror, for that matter. Further on that, he'd never have imagined that those two would have found anything in common. One was a genius, after all, and the other was a savage death-worlder who'd beaten a monster to death with a piece of another monster. Not exactly scientific award-winning material. I was not aware, he said, his curiosity piqued. Do you know what they've made? They have not seen fit to inform me yet, Beckmer snapped. A problem I wish you to remedy for me. And once that problem is resolved, please inform our resident human that we have need to place him into stasis once again. Stasis again? Chur asked. This meeting had been filled with surprises. The meeting itself had been a considerable surprise, and of all things he'd never expected Beckmer to be putting the human into a box again. Of them all, he was the only one who didn't seem to mind working for the Kortai. Claimed he owed them his life, in fact. Chur wasn't sure whether that made him a friend or an enemy. But as he didn't fancy having the human as an enemy, he hoped it was the former. We need to send him on a short trip, Beckmer said. Let him know that he won't need to pack anything. The door opened, interrupting the married couple's frenzied neck-wrangling. They panted as they regained their composure, returning as quickly as they could to their professional duties.
You did it,
Murga breathed.
I hardly believe it.
My lovely wife needs to put more faith in her husband's cleverness, Crick replied teasingly. Now let's see what's in...
They were interrupted by the whir of machinery and the clank of pneumatics. A blue line of pulsing light flashed over them, and they recoiled as one from its intensity. They could feel it burn slightly where it touched on their skin, and they shielded their eyes to prevent themselves from being blinded by it.
No match found,
spoke a cold, mechanical voice from the darkness.
Purging alien material.
Red irises lit in the darkness, joined by the glowing energy of an unknown weapon. Red-orange light reflected off of polished chrome, revealing reptilian features with sharp, pointed teeth. Crick threw himself in front of his wife in a desperate act to protect her from whatever it was, but his feeble attempt was the very essence of ineffectiveness. An arc of white-hot light punched straight through him and Murga both, scorching the wall behind them with a black circle where the metal burned. The light had burned straight through both of them, but it was not mortal, and they both screamed in agony and terror. Neither could move, and at least one of them had lost control of their bowels. But any concerns of impropriety were far beyond them now. Murga watched a second pulse destroy her husband's head, silencing him forever. The remains of his face were ash collapsing around a hole that somehow seemed to turn and face her as the corpse spasmed. She gibbered in fear and horror. until the third pulse came for her. "There you are," Chair said as he entered the quarters. The 4 soldiers had been assigned for sleeping. Even if Adrian spent more of his nights in the medical bay being monitored by Triafa for, Chair realized he didn't really know what. "Here I am," Adrian said, stowing a long something that had a very weapon-esque appearance to it. "What's up, mate?" "I've just had a chat with Beckmer," Chair said seriously. Adrian snorted humorlessly.
And what did our bald friend have to say for himself?
"About that," Chair continued. "He wanted us to have a chat of our own. I think some things are about to change." All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the end here. I really appreciate you. This is another chapter of Salvage, obviously, by user Rantarian. Just wanted to say thanks again, guys, for watching. And if you can, go ahead and give it a like and a subscribe if you'd like to see some more stuff from me. Should be doing quite a few of these over the next weeks or so. So, yeah, guys, you all have a great one, and we'll see you next time.